She had asked him once, just once, if he was ashamed of her. He laughed. Not the warm kind. The kind that meant the question itself was beneath him. That was 8 months before the night. Everything changed. His name was Preston Whitfield. Hers was Cora. And for 4 years, Cora Whitfield had made herself smaller, quieter, easier to carry. Because that was what the marriage seemed to require. She had loved him. She needed to say that, because the rest of the story makes no sense without it. She had genuinely, completely loved him. The kind of love that makes a woman rearrange her whole life and not even notice she's doing it. Preston was a senior partner at Hartley & Voss, one of the oldest legal firms in Boston. He moved through rooms the way men like him always do, like the room had been waiting for him specifically. Tall, confident, the kind of handsome that photographs well and ages into distinction. People noticed him, and he noticed that people noticed him, and that was its own ecosystem he lived inside. Cora had noticed him too, once. Back when noticing him felt like something she was allowed to do. She had been a ceramics professor at Briarfield College, running her own small studio on the side. Cora Ashby Studio, named after her mother's maiden name. She'd built it slowly, over 7 years, before Preston. Commissions for private collectors, installations in corporate lobbies, a piece that ended up in the permanent collection at the New England Craft Museum. None of it loud. None of it the kind of thing Preston's colleagues talked about at dinner parties. That was the first thing she learned to leave at the door. The second thing was her opinion on anything that might complicate his. The third thing, and this one happened so gradually she couldn't name the exact moment, was herself. By the time they'd been married 3 years, she had stepped back from teaching. Closed the studio. She told herself it was temporary, that she needed to give the marriage room to grow. Preston had never asked her to do any of it directly. He was too careful for that. He simply went quiet when she talked about a new commission, or changed the subject when she mentioned a student whose work had moved her. He would look at her across the dinner table with an expression she could never quite read. Not anger, not contempt, something colder than both. And she would trail off mid-sentence and reach for her wine. She had learned to read the silences. They were a language all their own. The night of the Aldercroft annual gala, Cora was in the bedroom trying to choose between 2 dresses when Preston appeared in the doorway already dressed, black tie. He looked perfect, as he always did when it mattered to him. "You're wearing that?" he said. She was holding a forest green wrap dress she'd worn to his colleague's retirement dinner 2 years ago, and everyone had complimented. "I thought, I'll be downstairs," he said. And he was gone. She stood there for a moment. Then she put the green dress back on the hanger, changed into something black and quiet that she knew he preferred, and went downstairs. In the car, he told her. He didn't look at her when he said it. He kept his eyes on the road, hands loose on the wheel, voice the same flat register he used for conference calls he considered a waste of his time. "I've been seeing someone," he said. "I wasn't planning to tell you like this, but I think you should know before tonight because she'll be there." Cora didn't say anything. "Her name is Hadley. Hadley Brandt. She's a federal prosecutor. We've been." He paused. Not out of guilt, she realized. Out of the effort of finding the right word. Involved for about a year. Involved for about a year. "I think we should separate," he said. "The marriage has been over for a while. You know that." She did know it. That was the thing. She had known it in the marrow of her bones for longer than she wanted to admit, and yet hearing it said out loud in that voice, with that particular lack of ceremony, no eye contact, no apology, barely even a pause, it was like being handed a diagnosis for something that had already killed you. "You deserve someone more aligned with what you actually are," he said, and then, quieter, like a footnote, "I need someone in my corner, Cora. Someone who shows up. You've been somewhere else for years." She almost laughed. She had been somewhere else. She had been folded so far into the shape of what he needed that she'd forgotten she had a shape of her own, and now he was telling her she'd been absent. The car stopped at a light. In the window's reflection, she could see her own face. Pale, composed. A woman who had learned not to react in front of him. "Are we still going?" she asked. He glanced at her then. Just briefly. "I am. You don't have to." She looked back at the road ahead. "I'm going." They didn't speak for the rest of the drive. The Aldercroft Gala was held at the Pembroke Estate, a converted mansion on the edge of the harbor that the Boston legal and business community rented every November for their signature event. 600 guests. Black cars lined up along the circular drive. Valets moving in practiced silence, every window lit from within like a lantern. Preston stepped out of the car and didn't wait for her. Cora sat in the back seat for exactly 12 seconds. She counted them. Then she opened the door herself and stood up into the cold November air, and something happened that she would not be able to explain properly later. Something shifted. Not dramatically. Not like a crack of thunder. More like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for a long time. She called her phone, scrolled to a contact she almost never used, Emmett. Emmett Calloway was Preston's former colleague. They'd had a falling out 2 years ago over a case, something political that Cora had never fully understood, and Emmett had quietly left the firm and started his own boutique practice. He still moved in the same circles. He was also the one person in Preston's world who had always talked to Cora like she was the most interesting person in the room. He remembered what she said. He asked follow-up questions. At every event where Preston had been performing, Emmett had simply been present. And the difference between those two things had never felt more important than it did right now. She didn't know exactly why she was calling him. She needed a voice she trusted. That was the whole of it. He picked up on the second ring. "Cora?" He sounded alert, like he'd been awake. "I'm outside the Pembroke," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Preston just told me he's been seeing someone." "A year, Emmett?" "He told me in the car on the way here." Silence. A breath. "God," he said quietly. Then, "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet. Do you need me to come get you?" She looked up at the lit windows of the estate, the silhouettes moving inside, the whole gleaming machinery of the world Preston belonged to, humming along without her. "No," she said. "I think I need to go in." A pause. "Then I'll meet you there. I'm 15 minutes away. I was going anyway." She exhaled. "Okay, Cora." His voice dropped. "Careful. Whatever he said to you tonight, however he said it, that's on him." "You hear me?" She didn't answer right away. She pressed the phone lightly against her cheek, just for a second, like pressing a hand against a bruise to see if it still hurts. "I'll see you inside," she said. She went back to the car. Not to wait. She'd already asked the driver to come around. She sat in the back seat and she opened her phone and she looked at herself in the camera for a long moment. Really looked. The black dress she'd chosen because he preferred it. The hair pulled back the way he once said he liked. The careful, neutral face she had cultivated over 4 years of dinners and galas and conference room lunches where she was expected to be ornamental and undemanding. She took her hair down. It fell around her shoulders, dark and loose, the way she used to wear it before. She reached into her clutch and found the small lipstick she always carried but never used at his events because he'd once called the color too much. She put it on. A deep, warm red. She looked at herself again. Then she reached back and found the garment bag she'd nearly left at home, a dress she'd bought on a solo trip to New York 8 months ago, on an afternoon when she'd wandered into a boutique near the Flatiron Building and tried it on mostly to feel something. She had bought it on impulse, feeling briefly, startlingly like herself. She had hung it in the back of the closet and half forgotten it. It was copper gold silk. The kind of color that catches every light source in a room simultaneously. She changed in the back of the car. She didn't care that the driver could theoretically see in the rearview mirror. She was past that particular kind of self-consciousness. When she stepped out the second time, she was somebody that the night air seemed to pause for. Emmett was waiting at the top of the front steps, scanning the drive. When he saw her, he went very still. She watched his expression move through something she didn't have a name for. Surprise, something warmer, something careful. And then he came down the steps to meet her. "Cora," he said. He said her name the way people say it when they mean something by it. "Hi." She almost smiled. "Don't make it a thing." "I'm not making it anything." But he was looking at her with the specific attention of someone who sees, not the performance, the actual person. "You look." He stopped himself, started again. "You look like you again." That landed somewhere she wasn't ready for. She pressed her lips together briefly. "Let's go in." He offered his arm and she took it, and they walked through the tall doors of the Pembroke estate into the light. The ballroom inside was everything the season demanded. Vaulted ceilings, long white tablecloths, chandeliers throwing light in every direction. The kind of room that makes people feel they're at the center of something important. A string quartet in the corner. Glasses lifted and tilted, conversations spinning through the air like weather. Cora had been to 6 of these. She had stood at Preston's elbow at all of them, watching him work the room, fetching drinks, smiling at people whose names she could never quite remember and who could never quite remember hers. Tonight felt entirely different. She didn't know if it was the dress, or Emmett beside her, or the fact that something had broken open in the car. The specific kind of breaking that is actually a release. But she walked into that ballroom, and she felt the room receive her, not the way it received Preston, with deference and familiarity. Something less calculated. Something more like recognition. Heads turned. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But in the way that happens when something in the atmosphere shifts. She saw Preston across the room almost immediately. He was standing near the bar with a woman Cora recognized from photographs. Hadley Brandt, early 40s, sharp-faced and self-possessed in a slate gray gown. They were in conversation with 2 senior partners from Hartley and Voss was doing what Preston did best, performing ease. Then he glanced toward the door, and he saw her. She watched it happen from across the room. The slight freeze. The glass that stopped moving halfway to his lips, his eyes moving over her like he was trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the woman he'd spoken to 40 minutes ago in a moving car. He couldn't. That was visible from 20 feet away. Hadley followed his gaze. Her expression adjusted in a way Cora recognized, not jealousy, precisely, but the recalibration of an assumption. She had clearly formed an image of what Cora Whitfield would look like walking into this room tonight. Whatever image that was, it was no longer accurate. Emmett murmured something near her ear, a comment about the quartet's song choice. Dry and warm. And she laughed. An actual laugh. The kind that doesn't ask permission. She could feel Preston still looking. She didn't look back. Not yet. She moved through the room with Emmett at her side, greeting people she knew, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server, pausing to speak with Margaret Chu, the foundation director who'd commissioned 3 of Cora's pieces for the Aldercroft lobby years ago. "Cora, I heard you closed the studio," Margaret said, touching her arm. "Tell me that's not permanent." "It's not permanent," Cora said. And as she said it, she realized she meant it. Something that had been sealed was opening. "Good," Margaret said firmly. "We've been trying to acquire that wall piece you showed at the Craft Museum, the one in the blue and amber. We'd like to discuss a permanent loan, or a purchase, whichever you'd prefer." Cora blinked. "The Meridian piece?" "That exact one." "Call my office Monday." She held that, set it somewhere careful inside herself, filed it next to the other things she'd been given tonight. the other version of herself she'd apparently misplaced. A hand touched her elbow. She turned. Preston. He'd crossed the room. That in itself was something. He was not a man who crossed rooms for people. People crossed rooms for him. "Can I have a word?" he said. He kept his voice low, even, the courtroom voice he used when he wanted to control a situation. Emmett had turned slightly away, giving them the courtesy of the moment. Cora met Preston's eyes. This was the first time she'd actually looked at him since the car. He looked the same as he always did, and yet, something had shifted in the distance between them. The distance she used to try to close and had now simply stopped measuring. "Sure," she said. Her voice came out calm. Genuinely calm, not the performed kind. He searched her face for something. She wasn't sure what. "You look different," he said finally. "I know." "The dress, Preston?" She said his name quietly, but it stopped him. "I spoke to David Chen this afternoon." David was her attorney. She'd called him hours earlier, before the gala, after she'd spent an hour in the bathroom of their house, sitting on the edge of the tub just breathing. "I know tonight wasn't how you planned this, but I think it's fine. I think this is probably the right thing." He stared at her. "You call the lawyer." "I called my lawyer," she said. "Yes." Something moved across his face. Not remorse. She knew him well enough not to mistake his expressions. More like the specific discomfort of a man who had expected to be in control of this particular sequence of events and found that he wasn't. "Cora?" "It's okay," she said, and she meant it. Not in the self-erasing way she used to mean things. In the way of someone who has looked clearly at a situation and accepted its shape. "We don't have to make this hard." She touched his arm once, briefly. The way you touch the wall of a house you grew up in when you're leaving it for the last time. And then she turned and walked back to where Emmett was standing. He looked at her with a question he didn't ask. "I'm fine," she told him. And the strange thing was, she was. They stayed another hour and a half. She ate something at dinner. Sea bass, which she would remember later as the first meal in years that she tasted. She spoke to people she'd been too fated to speak to at previous events. She told Margaret she'd call Monday. She accepted a card from a gallery director named Piers who'd apparently been trying to find her since a group show 3 years ago. At some point, Emmett leaned over and said, "I didn't know about him and Hadley. I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "I would have told you. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I say something without you thinking it's the wrong time?" She looked at him sideways. "Probably not." "Then I'll save it." She almost laughed again. She almost laughed again. She was doing that more tonight than she had in months. "Say it." He turned to face her more fully, and his expression had that quality again, the careful, genuine attention. "I've thought about you differently than I've let on. For longer than it would be appropriate to say right now." He paused. "I'm saying it anyway because I think you should know that someone has been paying attention. The real you. Not the version of you that you've been performing for this room for 4 years. She sat with that for a moment. Outside, through the tall windows, she could see the harbor lights wavering. "You're right," she said finally. "It's the wrong time." "I know. But I heard it." "That's enough," he said. "That's all I wanted." Later, as the gala wound down and the crowd thinned, she looked back once across the room. Preston was still there, standing near the bar where she'd first spotted him. Hadley had gone. Someone had mentioned to Cora in passing, carefully, that she'd left early. Preston was with 2 colleagues, a glass in his hand, laughing at something. Performing. She watched him for exactly 1 second, long enough to feel something. Not love, not anger. Something that was on its way to being neither. Something that, if she was patient with it, would eventually become indifference. The clean kind, that doesn't need anything from anyone. She turned away. She said goodbye to Margaret, to Piers, to a few others. She picked up her copper gold skirt and walked out the tall front doors into the November air. Emmett walked her to the car. "Monday," he said. She tilted her head. "What's Monday?" "You're calling Margaret." "Maybe I could." He stopped, reconsidered. "Never mind. Let Monday be Monday." She almost said something. Instead, she looked up at him for a moment in the cold dark. The harbor just visible past the tree line. The sound of the party behind them growing distant. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I would have come anyway," he told her. She got in the car. She pulled her coat around the copper gold silk. She looked out the window as the Pembroke estate receded behind her, and she didn't look back. That night she came home to the house, their house, the one that would need to be sorted through lawyers and paperwork and all the careful machinery of uncoupling. And instead of going to the bedroom, she went to the back room, the one she'd been using for storage for the past 2 years, the one that used to be her studio. She turned on the light. There were boxes everywhere. Her wheel in the corner, sheeted over with a drop cloth. Her tools hung on the pegboard, dusty but intact. Bags of clay stacked against the far wall, still sealed. She stood in the middle of the room for a long time just looking. Then she took the drop cloth off the wheel. The paperwork took 3 months. It was not a battle. Preston was many things, but he was a lawyer, and lawyers who want to leave clean do it efficiently. The house was sold. The assets were divided. She got slightly more than she'd expected, partly because David Chen was better at his job than she'd given him credit for. She found a studio apartment near Briarfield that had a ground floor space she could convert. She spent a month doing it herself, mostly laying the floors, running the kiln ventilation with the help of a contractor friend. She put her tools up on new pegboards. She ordered fresh clay. She called Briarfield about teaching. They had a ceramics position opening in the spring, 2 sections, introductory. She took it. She called Margaret Chu on that Monday, and the call went long, and by the end of it the Meridian piece had a new permanent home, and Cora had an invitation to be part of a group installation the Aldercroft Foundation was mounting in the fall. Emmett called her the following Saturday, not Monday. He was respectful enough to wait. She picked up. They talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Preston or the Gala or the last 4 years. Her mother's pottery, a book they'd both read, the particular tedium of Boston winters, the question of whether a person can recover a version of themselves they'd voluntarily surrender. She thought they could. He agreed. He asked if he could take her to dinner the following week. Somewhere quiet, he said. Not a gala. She said yes. The dinner was at a small Italian place in the South End that he'd been going to for 10 years. Cash only. No reservations. Impossible to get a table unless you knew the owner's name. They were there for 4 hours. She ate too much and didn't care. She laughed more than she had in a year. She told him about her mother, about the first piece she'd ever fired in a kiln at 14, about the exact moment in grad school when she understood what she was supposed to do with her life. He told her about his own exit from Hartley and Voss, which was less diplomatic than she'd assumed, and about the case that had ended it, and about the specific relief of doing work you believed in, even if the room was smaller. At the end of the night, he walked her home through the cold, and at the door he didn't push for anything. He simply said her name and told her that this had been the best evening he'd had in longer than he could remember, and she believed him. She went upstairs and sat on the windowsill in her new apartment with a cup of tea, looking out at the street below. She could hear the city doing what cities do at midnight, soft and continuous, a kind of hum that she had missed. Living in the house, in the quiet neighborhood Preston had chosen because it suited his image. She had a studio again. She had work that meant something. She had a dinner to think about, and more to come if she wanted them, somewhere across the city, and a life that was no longer hers. Preston Whitfield was probably doing what Preston Whitfield did, adjusting his cufflinks, checking his phone, looking for rooms to walk into so people could notice him. She didn't wish him harm. She didn't wish him much of anything. He had become, in the space of a few months, simply a fact about her past. One she would account for and carry lightly and eventually sat down entirely. She thought about what Emmett had said, that he'd been paying attention, that he saw the real version of her, not the performance. She thought about that phrase for a while, the real version, as if there had ever been more than one, as if she'd ever been anything other than exactly herself, even when she was bending out of shape trying not to be. She was 36 years old. She had a kiln and a lease and a fall installation and a Saturday dinner she was already looking forward to. She had a woman in the mirror she recognized. That was the thing about disappearing slowly. You don't notice it until you stop. And once you stop, the coming back isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in a single night, in a copper gold dress under chandeliers. It happens in a studio at midnight with your hands in clay. It happens on a windowsill with a cup of tea going cold. It happens in increments, quietly, at your own speed. But it starts somewhere, and for Cora Ashby, because that was the name she was going back to, all the way back. It started in the back seat of a car, in a dress the color of firelight, choosing to go in,